Hey guys, JB here from Alpha Wolf Consulting, coming to you today with another episode of Walking the Path of a Shaman. And in this episode, I wanted to talk about some things that I've been really working on in the last couple of weeks, and it has to do around apathy and empathy. And it's very important because as I look back on my life and on myself and how I act and sort of show up in the world, I noticed a trend that I fall into the trap of apathy, where I close my heart off and sort of become callous to others and callous to myself. And sort of, it's funny because a lot of what I've noticed is the apathy comes from the ego, in terms of when I am apathetic, it's sort of like I'm thinking about what others have done to me and what they should do and all of this and how things should be, rather than being empathetic. When I notice within myself, when I'm empathetic, I am a lot more considerate and conscious of other people and sort of the trials and tribulations that they go through. And it's very, very funny to me because the more I think on it, the more I realize that apathy is what creates the negativity in life when I don't consider other people, or I don't have compassion for other people when I make decisions and take actions in life. And it's very, very funny because I had an experience the other day that really showed me the value of empathy over apathy. And it was on my walk where I've noticed that along the highways there's a lot of broken glass and a lot of rubbish along the highways in Queensland. And I was thinking about that, to think, how could people, throw an empty beer bottle or glass bottle out the window without any thought of consideration or compassion for other people that may be using the roadways, for animals, for nature itself. And it's very, very funny because in viewing that and sort of trying to, I guess, understand like how people could sort of do that, where if you think about it, we litter, we destroy nature, we use poisons on the earth and all of this. And it's sort of like a lot of the people who do this, I would assume, are quite compassionate, or at least try to be compassionate towards themselves and towards others. But it's sort of like, if I were to use poison, for example, in my garden to get rid of the weeds, it's sort of like I'm not considering the additional effects that poison has on the soil and the future of that soil, in terms of the half-life of poison and things like that, and how it influences, if I was growing veggies or if I was growing fruit trees or anything to sustain myself. And it's very funny because we notice this a lot with, for example, mass-produced farming and agriculture and things like that, where, for example, they use substances and different chemicals and things like that, like fertilizers, pesticides, without consideration for the effect that it would have on the health of the end consumer. And I think about that, and it's easy to sort of see it as these people are intentionally trying to harm people, and they're not considerate or caring about other people's health. But it's sort of like most people don't consider other people in their decision making. And I used to be, and I am bad for this, and it's very, very funny, because for me personally, when I think about this, it's a lot to do around, for example, if someone were to attack me, the apathetic side of me would say that it's justifiable to attack them back, when the empathetic side of me would say, like, there's a reason for their behavior. And I used to think that empathy was a lot to do with, not so much justifying other people's behavior, but trying to understand why they're taking those behaviors and those decisions. And what I personally realized with myself is that when in any decision or action, I consider the effects that my decisions or actions will have on other people as if it would happen to me. So for example, if we take the example of the glass bottles being thrown out of a moving car and littering, it's sort of like when I go to take that action, if I think, how would that affect me if, for example, I lived in the area where I'm about to litter? If I was walking down that road, would I want to walk on broken glass? Do you sort of understand what I mean? And it's very, very important, because I've noticed this a lot within my life, bloody ants, that even in the most logical ways that I can sort of justify to myself why actions or decisions are right, I find that when I look back, a lot of the times I was apathetic to other people, where if someone said something disrespectful to me, it was okay to be disrespectful to them. Whereas even if someone's disrespectful to me, how would I want to be treated by me in that instant? So it's sort of like, for example, violence creates more violence. It doesn't cease violence. And love creates more love, even if it isn't, sort of shown immediately. So for example, if someone is disrespectful to me and I am respectful to them, even if they're not instantly respectful back to me, more than likely throughout their day, week, month, year, it'll have an impact where they will start to be more respectful. So it's sort of this idea of, like, I create the environments around me by how I show up in the environments, but also by what I put out into the environment. So for example, if I want people to be respectful to me, then I would be respectful to other people, regardless of if they are respectful back or not. Because it's sort of like, if I fall into the trap of apathy, where I'm disrespecting people who aren't respecting me, I'm only creating more disrespect into my environment, which is very, very funny, because the more I think on this and the more I realize it, sort of in my own life, when I take actions of apathy towards other people, or apathetic actions towards other people, where I don't consider how that would affect me if I were being treated the way I was treating other people, even if I'm justified in doing so, what I realized was, looking back on it, I was just creating more negative emotions within myself and negative emotions within my external environment, which is very, very funny, because in life I've always sought the opposite. So for example, growing up and all of that, like, I had a rough, violent childhood, like many do, no more or no less than other people, or not so much no less, but I didn't have a more violent life than other people. But the thing was, is I learned from a young age that you always had to be on guard, ready to protect yourself, ready to defend yourself. And I didn't realize that that was apathy, that need to always be ready to strike back. Should someone say something, disrespectful to me or dismissive to me, I should have a comeback ready. I should be ready to attack, to tear them apart with my words. And the funny thing is that in the moment you don't realize, but you're walking around holding on to this anger, just waiting to let it out, just waiting to let go of it, to use it against other people. And for much of my early adult life, that is how I was. Always angry on the inside, waiting, because I always needed to be prepared. When in truth, I didn't realize this, but apathy has a way of destroying and sort of eroding our sense of self. In terms of my sense of self is, I like to be a nice person and a kind person because that's how I like to be treated. I like to be around people who are nice, kind, compassionate, and all of this. And the funny thing was that I realized is even by me just, walking around and holding on to anger and resentment and things like that, what I was actually doing was broadcasting or aligning to other people who were like that. So a lot of friendships and relationships and all of that was sort of, with me, what I noticed were they were based on a premise of waiting for the first strike. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're friends until something happens and then we have a go at each other. And it's very, very funny because I didn't realize how it eroded my connection to other people. The more apathetic I became, in terms of the more prepared I was to fight, to attack others, to defend myself, the less connected I was to those around me, because I was always waiting for the shoe to drop, in terms of waiting for the conversation to turn south, for them to be disrespectful, for them to attack me, and all of this. So it's sort of like I was broadcasting and aligning to the frequencies of people who were also like that. And what I realized was, the more empathetic I could be to other people, the less prepared for violence I was, because I wasn't trying to anticipate violence or disrespect or anything like that. And it's a very, very funny thing, because on my travels at the moment, when I'm sleeping, outside in the middle of nowhere, it's sort of like I had a fear of, being asleep and then someone pulling up and attacking me, or someone, pulling up and trying to steal my stuff and things like that. And what I realized was, if I'm only ever seeing the negative and the bad in the world, I'm going to sort of move more towards circumstances and experiences where that is the case. Whereas if I'm only seeing the positive and believing in the good of people, it doesn't guarantee that negative people aren't going to find me, and that, you know, I'm not going to have negative interactions. But it's sort of like I don't have to walk around and have this feeling of stress of always needing to be prepared to defend myself, or prepared to, you know, like notice someone stealing from me or something like that. And it's very, very funny, because the more I lean into empathy, the more connected and the easier it is for me to connect to other people and to sort of feel connected and feel a sense of belonging. The more apathetic I am, the more I create distance from others. The more I segregate myself from others, the less I feel like I belong around others. And it's very funny, because it's sort of like, it's not like we're born empathetic, but it's just choices that we make. Like, how do we choose to show up? Like, how do we want to show up in life? And for me personally, you know, like, I attest violence, and I do not sort of condone violence, and I don't want violence in my life. So it's sort of like, if that's the case, then why would I need to prepare for violence? Do you sort of understand? And it's very funny, because as I realized this, and I started to consider and be more considerate of other people in terms of when making a decision or when talking to someone, rather than talking to them as if, you know, I'm waiting for them, you know, to attack me or disrespect me or something like that. It's sort of like I'm able to talk to them as if I'm talking to myself, how I would like to be talked to, how I would like to talk to myself. And the more I sort of practice this within my own life and my own experiences, the more my internal dialogue and my internal thoughts started to reflect this. So rather than my thoughts being negative, my thoughts started shifting to being predominantly positive, in terms of when I consider how, like, for example, let's take defense. When I consider how it would feel for me to attack myself physically, it makes it a lot easier for me to not want to take those actions, because I don't want that negativity in my life. And it's very, very funny, because the more I did this, and a big fear I had was that if I let go to the apathy and the anger and the resentment, I wouldn't be prepared for life. Because when I'm highly empathetic, and in that state of being empathetic, my guards are down in terms of, you know, I'm not thinking about defending myself, I'm not thinking about attacking other people and all of that, and I'm not angry. So I'm sort of like, when I'm happy, I don't want violence, I don't want to be a part of violence. And it's very, very funny, because we all have this in our own life where we can choose to walk around apathetically or empathetically, where we can walk around, you know, preparing to attack others, you know, judging others, expecting the worst from life, or we can walk around and basically show others the compassion that we want, show others the consideration that we want, show others, you know, how we want to be treated in a very caring way, in terms of, you know, we're able to create heaven on earth by being kind to one another, by being considerate to one another, by being compassionate to one another, by, you know, really, really caring for one another as if we were the same. And this is very important, because if everyone in the world acted like this, war would be an impossible feat, because no one would want to harm another. And it's very funny, because society promotes apathy. So society promotes, you know, being apathetic to one another. You know, should someone steal from you, they have, you know, taken from you. When in truth, you know, if someone steals from you, it's sort of like, you know, you don't have to treat them negatively, even though they've taken a negative action, because treating someone negative who takes a negative action only reinforces more negative actions in the future. And it's like, if we want to cease that behavior and move past it, in terms of help that person to see the error of, you know, taking negative actions in life, it's sort of like we have to be the example. Does that sort of make sense? So it's sort of like, what I realized is, in life, if I don't like violence and I detest violence, then what I have to do is be the example of that, like Jesus, and sort of live every day, every moment, every decision and every action being the example of detesting, let's say, violence. And sort of, even if, like Jesus, you know, it leads to, you know, my own crucifixion or death, it's sort of like the wrongs of attacking another just because they attack me doesn't really justify the end result, because it'll never lead to a more positive world. And when I think back on sort of how Jesus lived, it's sort of like, this makes a lot of sense, in terms of the more I can, you know, uphold that example of forgiveness, of love, of compassion, of empathy towards all, regardless of their status, position, regardless of how they treat me, regardless of how they treat others, the more I show, you know, those around me and those who interact with me a better way to do it. And it's sort of like, it takes a lot more strength to be empathetic than it does to be apathetic. And it's very, very interesting if you think about it in your own life. It's sort of like, how can we all resemble or recreate like Jesus's example within our own life, within, you know, our interactions in society, within, you know, what we consume in terms of media and information and all of that. Because a lot of current media and current entertainment and current news is all about apathy, in terms of, you know, let's say youth crime, these kids are going out there and going on these crime sprees. It's like, yeah, we can lock them up, we can throw the book at them, but is that really going to change their behaviour? Is that going to improve our quality of life and their quality of life? And if you think back to the 1900s, to the 1940s, 50s, people really cared about the others in their community. And as sort of like I grew up in the 90s, it sort of started to peter out and sort of ended, where a lot of people sort of started disconnecting from the overall community and started selectively choosing their own communities, their own family, you know, their own friend circle. And it's very funny because in not many places do you walk down the street and people say hi to you. You know what I mean? If you're in a small rural town, this happens a lot more. But it's sort of like in the bigger cities and things like that, where a lot of society is based, it's sort of like people just apathetically walk past you without even acknowledging you. And it's sort of like it's a negative thing to sort of, you know, try and connect with others in the community unless you're accepted and a part of their community. And it's very funny like this, because it's this division that sort of creates the fear in society, the fear of others, the fear of, you know, being attacked, being robbed, being mugged, and all of that. And it's very funny because it's sort of like we need to have the strength to when, for example, let's say we're walking through the city, to make eye contact with someone and say hello. Do you know what I mean? To create that bond or that connection through interaction. All right, well, I hope you enjoy this one, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Bye.